My name is Richard Cohen. I'm the president of the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm joined today by Brenda Abdulal, the charity's program director from Muslim Advocates, Janet Murguia, the president of the National Council of La Raza, Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Wade Henderson, the president of the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. We're here today to release two reports that document that President-elect Donald Trump's own words have sparked incidents around the country and have had hate incidents around the country and have had a profoundly negative effect on our schools. The first report is called 10 Days After, Harassment and Intimidation in the Aftermath of the Election. It describes 867 incidents of hate that we collected from around the country in the 10 days immediately following the election. I have no doubt whatsoever that this is a tremendous, tremendous undercount. Now, the incidents we're talking about have taken place in schools, on public streets and parks, and in retail establishments. Many people have been targeted in their homes. The incidents have been ugly. They have been aimed at people because of their ethnicity, their race, their religion, their sexual orientation, and their gender. Time after time, the perpetrators have invoked Mr. Trump's name, his slogan, or his words in their assaults. Time after time, those who reported hate incidents to us said that they had never experienced anything like that before. The level of hate that's been unleashed by the election, they've told us, is something entirely new. Our second report is called After Election Day, the Trump Effect. It is based on the first 10,000 reports that we've received from educators from around the country about the impact of the election on their students and their schools. That impact has been incredibly disturbing. 80% of the educators, the teachers who have responded to us, have reported heightened anxiety among their traditionally marginalized students. Students who are recent immigrants are living in real fear. 40% of the respondents, 40% of the teachers who responded to us, reported hearing derogatory comments directed against students of color, Muslims, immigrants, and LGBT students. Over 2,500 specific incidents were reported to us where the teachers told us that Mr. Trump's name had been invoked, where rhetoric from the election had been employed. Again, and most disturbingly perhaps, 85% of the teachers who responded to us told us that they were worried about the long run. They were worried about the continuing impact of the election, Mr. Trump's rhetoric on their students. They don't think that this is going away anytime soon. Now, since his election, Mr. Trump has disavowed white supremacy. He's told the harassers to stop it. But what he hasn't done is acknowledge that his own words have sparked the barrage of hate that we're seeing. Instead, what's he done? He's feigned ignorance. He said that he's surprised that any of his supporters would be harassing or intimidating anyone. He says he has no idea why white supremacists would be energized by his election. Really? Neither of these facts should be a mystery to anyone, much less to Mr. Trump. He's been singing the white supremacist song since he came down that escalator in his tower and announced his candidacy, calling Mexican immigrants racist. Instead of pretending to be surprised by the pervasive hate that has infected our country, Mr. Trump needs to take responsibility for it and repair the damage that he's caused. He needs to speak out forcefully and repeatedly against bigotry. He needs to apologize to the communities he's injured and demonstrate that they will be protected and valued in his administration. He needs to go to Jersey City and apologize to the Muslim community there for casting aspersions on their patriotism by lying about their reaction to the 9/11 attacks. He needs to go to Los Angeles to assure dreamers there that he will not use any information from their applications for deferred action to deport them or their families. And he needs to go to Chicago to apologize to the black community for his grotesque stereotypic descriptions of their lives and neighborhoods. More importantly, his words must be followed by concrete actions, both in his policies and in his appointments, that repair the wounds of division that his campaign has caused. 600,000 people have signed petitions on our websites asking him to do just that. If he does not, anything less than an apology, repairing the damages that he's caused, reaching out to marginalized communities, and having his actions follow his words, if he doesn't do those things, the hate that Mr. Trump has unleashed during this election season will continue to flourish. Now, I'll be happy to answer a few questions in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to turn the podium over to my colleagues. Brenda?
Thank you, Richard. Good morning. Today, we stand hand in hand with our fellow Americans who reject racism, bigotry, anti-Muslim hate, anti-Semitism, and division. The FBI reported a 67% increase in hate crimes against Muslims in 2015. And we expect an even more dramatic rise in incidents of hate and violence when the data for 2016 is tabulated and released. In fact, Muslim Advocates has been tracking hate crimes since November 2015, and we have recorded nearly 175 hate crimes against American Muslims or those perceived to be Muslim in the date leading up to the election. And we're disturbed by the increased frequency of reported hate crimes and hate incidents since the election all across the country. President-elect Trump's recent statements against hate violence and white supremacist groups that support his election is a step in the right direction. But there must be more. We need him to strongly reject bigotry in all its forms, unequivocally call on Americans to stop the hate violence, and ensure that his administration will prosecute perpetrators of hate crimes to the fullest extent under the law. Furthermore, President-elect Trump must reconsider some of the selections he has made as top advisors to his administration. Otherwise, the selections of individuals like Steve Bannon, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, and Senator Jeff Sessions indicate that the bigoted and divisive rhetoric that we saw in the campaign will continue as a matter of policy and practice in the White House. America is hurting right now, and all of us need to come together and feel safe. Children are getting bullied. Women with headscarves are being attacked, and bigoted rhetoric has become commonplace across the country. Hate crimes have skyrocketed, and American Muslims, like many Americans, are genuinely fearful. If President-elect Trump wants to bring America together and be a leader for all Americans, he will need to disavow the dangerous proposals and ideas that single out and demonize Muslims and other communities. Now is the time for President-elect Trump to make changes in his rhetoric, his selections, and the policies under consideration by his incoming administration in order to send a strong message of unity to all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you.
My name is Janet Murguia, and I'm President and CEO of the National Council of La Raza. You know, less than 48 hours after election night, NCLR, National Council of La Raza, hosted a check-in call with all of our affiliates across the country. Our affiliates are community-based organizations that provide health, education, economic, and social services to millions of Latinos and others every single day. Many of them run charter schools or after-school programs. More than 100 organizations, nearly 150, participated, and what we heard from them troubled us deeply. Virtually all of these affiliates focused on the same issue. We asked them what were they hearing and seeing in our community even in those 2 days after the election. And what they said was the devastating impact of the election, its tone, its divisiveness, its harsh rhetoric, and yes, its outcome was having on the children they know and serve. They reported on countless incidents of harassment, of verbal and physical taunts, of widespread bullying, and most tragically, of many students contemplating taking their own lives. They also stressed the profound anxiety and fear that have gripped these children about the future. They are deeply worried, these children are deeply worried about their parents and other family members due to the immigration status. These kids are frightened, and with reason, that their families may be broken up by the policies of the incoming administration. They are left to wonder whether the draconian statements of candidate Trump will be carried out by President Trump. In short, everything SPLC chronicled in its new critically important report is corroborated by the calls and conversations we've had over the past several weeks. We are angered and saddened, but not surprised by the fact that 90% of teachers have witnessed a negative impact on their students and that 80% noted how anxious their students are. This is unacceptable. NCLR has already begun working with our affiliates to provide support, including mental health services and teacher training to address bullying. We are working with partners like our friends here today to combat this issue together and at a national level. And we are grateful to SPLC both for documenting what is going on by issuing these reports and also for helping us document what is going on in our community. For example, we've already translated and made in a culturally competent way SPLC's report form from English to Spanish and posted it on our website. But much more needs to happen, and it has to start with the president-elect. While he has said he wants to be the president of all Americans, we've heard precious little in response to what is going on in his name, especially when it comes to the impact it has had on children and young people. President-elect Trump needs to reassure, or at the very least address, the anxiety and fear of so many communities for whom he will now also be president. President-elect Trump, we are asking you, we need you to protect and defend all Americans and condemn the violence and hate being committed in your name. Reach out to marginalized communities. Repair the damage. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Brenda and Janet and Wade. My name is Randy Weingarten. I'm the president of the 1.6 million member American Federation of Teachers. We are the largest college union and the second largest teachers union. I'm here today not just to thank Richard, the SPLC, the other speakers, who all in big and small ways have been spending their adult lives fighting hate and bigotry, while at the same time increasing opportunity, economic and educational opportunity for Americans. This is not an either-or situation. This is a both-and situation in these United States of America. I appreciate what SPLC has now done because we cannot live in an evidence-free zone. During the campaign, Donald Trump's rhetoric and policy proposals pitted Americans against each other and created a culture of fear and division. And unfortunately, as the other speakers have said, and as this report demonstrates, we've seen a disturbing and unacceptable surge in hateful actions all too often carried out in Mr. Trump's name, particularly in schools. And while, as the other speakers have said, while Mr. Trump looked at the camera directly in a 60 Minutes interview and said to the people who were doing it when asked a question to stop it, his appointments are sending a very different message. As teachers know, you need to actually be consistent in your message if you want people to hear it. So the nomination of Jeff Sessions, the appointment of Steve Bannon, and the appointment of Mike Flynn all have sent the message that white supremacy and anti-Muslim conspiracy theories are in vogue these days. Why am I here? Because there is a tremendous amount at stake, particularly in our schools, pre-K through university, public and private, all of which must be safe and welcoming places of learning and acceptance for our students, for our parents, for our communities, and for the educators who serve our kids, for our children to survive, for them to grow, for them to thrive. They have to feel safe at school, and they have to feel that their parents are safe. And since this campaign, and now since this election, more and more do not feel safe. Over the past year, teachers have reported this disturbing trend. We even called it the Trump effect. We have story after story. A community college faculty member in Washington State was brought to tears when verbally assaulted with anti-immigrant slurs by other students. One of our members who came and testified last week, Scott Caston, who teaches at Maple Grove Senior High School near the Twin Cities in Minnesota, had black students find a sign saying, "Whites only, white America," and a vulgar message with an N-word painted on a stall door. I can go on and on. In my hometown, New York City, last week, 5 swastikas in Chelsea. My whole life, there was not more than 1 swastika anywhere in that city. 11 days ago, we sent a letter signed by 200 organizations, co-signed by Southern Poverty Law Center and by AFT, to the president-elect, asking him to denounce these actions that were done in his name. Over 43,000 people signed that letter as well. We know he received it. Since then, crickets, silence. Mr. Trump has claimed he will keep Americans safe and he will stand up for the little guy. But he refuses to speak up for the littlest guys, our children, who are being taunted and bullied in schools by kids who use his name as a weapon. The president-elect knows how to use his voice. He's done so to denounce a Broadway show, to denounce media personalities. But his lack of leadership here to end the hate-fueled acts inspired by his divisive campaign rhetoric is deafening. And don't tell me that others haven't stood up. Look what just happened, not just here, but just this weekend, even with Delta, where we saw that one unruly Trump-thumping passenger made more than 100 travelers uncomfortable. What did Delta do? They not only denounced the bad behavior, they barred the man from ever traveling on a Delta airplane. They apologized and reimbursed the victimized passengers. We've seen that kind of leadership from Governor Cuomo in New York, from Mayor de Blasio in New York City, from Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania, from Mayor Garcetti in LA. It's time for our president-elect to use his voice to effectively and unequivocally denounce these hateful acts that are done in his name. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank Richard Cohen and the Southern Poverty Law Center for these important reports and for their important research and leadership. I also want to thank my colleagues who are here this morning to bear witness so powerfully to the challenge of our time in addressing issues of hate and violence triggered in large part by the presidential election we've just experienced. Now, my name is Wade Henderson. I serve as President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. The Leadership Conference is the nation's leading civil and human rights coalition with over 200 national organizations working to build an America as good as its ideals. I'm honored to note that all of the organizations here today are members of our coalition. Now, throughout the presidential campaign, as you've heard, and especially in its aftermath, many of the communities that we represent have come to live in fear for their basic safety and well-being. And as these reports have made abundantly clear, that fear is unfortunately well justified. And during the course of this campaign, as we've heard, President-elect Trump discussed a broad range of proposals that, if implemented, would dramatically reverse our nation's progress on civil and human rights. And in the process, he has vilified innocent Americans as rapists, as terrorists, as criminals, inciting neighbors and co-workers and classmates to turn against one another. Now, the hate-filled rhetoric of this campaign was shameful and divisive in ways that go well beyond the boundaries of our political norms and traditions. But the vast majority of Americans who voted for Donald J. Trump did not vote for hatred, nor did they vote for violence, nor did they vote for terrorizing people for being who they are. Now, the America we know, the America we celebrate, the America we strive to create, is a nation that honors and respects equal protection of the law for all of its people. It embraces its diversity as a strength, and it strives to be a place where all people can live and work and study and pray and love as free and equal Americans. Now, the same nation that values these ideals, and let's just be honest about it, is itself an imperfect work in progress, but a work in progress nonetheless. Yes, its public schools are notoriously unequal. Its young men and women of color are often profiled by police, as are some in the Muslim community or communities thought to be Muslim, like Sikhs, for example, who experience harassment. It warehouses people of color in prisons, often with irrational and racially disparate sentences. But we know, as a nation and as communities, we can do better. But we won't do better with a president who fans the flames of bigotry, or treats women with disdain, or who responds to this outpouring of hatred and violence with indifference. Now, governors, state attorneys general, U.S. attorneys, members of Congress have already responded with programs, initiatives, and legislation which we celebrate for enhanced data collection and enforcement, and public calls for this kind of violence to end. But President-elect Trump has thus far failed to do his part. Now, President-elect Trump, you vowed to be the president for all of us. Today, we are calling on you to make good on that pledge by disavowing the hate speech that has infected our public discourse, and by telling your supporters and all Americans to stop committing these acts. You must lead by example in both word and deed. The nation and the world are watching. I will close with this one observation. Several of my colleagues have noted the appointments that President-elect Trump has made in the early days of his transition. And indeed, those appointments send a message that is unmistakable. And that unmistakable message seems to reinforce the very issues that are at the core of our concerns today. We are concerned about the impact of Jeff Sessions at the Department of Justice, General Mike Flynn, or Steve Bannon just a heartbeat away from the presidency. But the time to discuss these issues will soon arise on Capitol Hill. Right now, we're asking the president to stand up and to be counted and honor the pledge that he has made to the American people to be the president of us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Wade. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Randy.